Dark Lord of the Sith is in the DorkLair. Welcome to another DorkLair action figure review. Today I'm taking a look at the Hasbro HyperReal Darth Vader. Brand new line, brand new scale, and I've been really excited for this. I love the idea of a sort of premium Star Wars figure line that's a little bit beyond something like an SH Figuarts, but not quite in that Hot Toys price range, and this kind of hits that point. I'm really liking this figure a lot. There is one inherent flaw with just the nature of using a soft body like that, but I'll get to that in a little bit when we talk about the articulation. In general, I do like this figure very much, and I'm very much looking forward to the next figure in the line, the Luke Skywalker. So let's get into this review. All right, so taking a look at the packaging, it's got this like oddly shaped box that's got a window and a flap. On the back, it's got some information about the figure, like the metal skeleton and things like that. This flap opens up right here, and you can see the figure would be over here. It says Darth Vader. It's got the name there. Some images of the figure in different poses you can do, more poses here. And then the accessories were on display right there as well. So it's a pretty cool package. It's a weird shape because it's like trapezoidal or whatever. And it's just, going to be kind of tricky to save boxes. Luckily, this doesn't seem like it's going to be like a super deep line. So I don't think they'll add up very fast. But I've said that before about other lines. So we'll see what happens. But I like the packaging. I think it's pretty cool. All right, so starting off the review with the sort of sculpt paint and details. The helmet sculpt seems pretty good to me. I like the shape of it. If I had to have any complaint, I think it might feel a little bit like wide or something, a little spread. But in general, I think it looks pretty good. The eyes are glossier paint, and there's like a few different kinds of finishes. Like the mask has that gunmetal finish a little bit there. You have the silver paint details on these little pieces on the mask right here. And the helmet is nice and shiny. You can see basically my room reflected off of the helmet there. And yeah, I think the sculpt is pretty good. I like the shape of the helmet. It might seem slightly big. I think that's because it's a little bit wide, but I'm also not an expert. I don't like sit there and scrutinize over the accuracy of the helmet. Like, to me, this looks like Vader. It looks like a pretty good Vader to me. I'm sure there's going to be people who are going to be able to pick out exactly what's wrong with the helmet, but that's not really what I do here on this channel. Okay, so moving to the upper torso armor piece there, you can see that it's also got those two different finishes. Very cleanly painted with that shiny part versus the gunmetal part. Looks pretty nice. I'm not so sure about the shoulders. They seem a little weird, like a little oval to me or something, just the shape of them. But in general, they might be kind of covered up and mixed in with the cape anyway. So there's that. He's got the under tunic is made of a fabric material, and then you can see the box here on his chest. It's pretty detailed. Again, for accuracy, I don't really care how super accurate it is. I'm not exactly sure, but it's cleanly painted and it looks pretty good, and it looks like Vader's box to me. More details here, some silver paint on the buckle, and then some green paint and some other silver paint applications throughout the boxes on the pieces there. And then looking down at the cod piece, it's got like a sculpted, it's a fairly flexible plastic, but it's sculpted to look almost leathery, and I think it looks great. Sometimes the cod piece can look really big on Vader, sometimes it can look weird, but I think it looks pretty good on this one. And maybe that's because it's just a bigger figure and the things are scaling well together. Let's see what other plastic is on here. So the boots are basically like a rubber boot that's over this stuff, and then this piece on the front of the boot is like a shin guard, essentially, that is also cast in a plastic. Now, I don't know how accurate that is. Like, in the movie, does he have like a boot with a shin guard over the top of it, or is the whole thing a boot? I'm not 100% sure on that, but it looks nice. It's got a nice shiny finish to it. Down in the shoes here. got peg holes on the feet to go on the stand. And then you have the cape, and the cape has a pretty nice weight to it. It's a thin material, and it drapes down pretty well. It's a little bit on the stretchy side, so it's got some give to it. It's got a seam down along the side here that's pretty clean, all down along the side of this one. So it looks pretty good. It does have a little bit of wrinkling going on. I don't know if it's picking up in the video, but it kind of holds the wrinkles a little bit. So I don't know, maybe like a little bit of steam or something to smooth that out might help. And then so on to the actual body of the figure, and the material that it's made out of is a really interesting, squishy rubber, essentially. It's like I don't know if it's a latex or what it is, but it's a very squishy rubber. And then underneath, as you saw on the box image, there's a metal skeleton, and we'll get into the articulation in a bit. The body, the torso, is that soft material as well. It's all underneath. Like, this is a separate fabric piece, and you can see it underneath there. This fabric can tend to like shift out of the way a little bit, and you got to kind of shift it back and play around with it because it's all one big piece that can move around and stuff with the skirt underneath and everything. But yeah, and then you have the gloves. The gloves are also a hard plastic, and it's all one piece, so the hand pops all the way off from here down, which I'll show you again when we get into the accessories. And then the legs, same squishy material. I think it really looks like his suit, They did a really good job of making it look like that kind of cushiony, padded, almost like a leathery type of thing around him, and it looks really good. So the overall appearance of this guy, I'm very happy with. I think this is an excellent looking figure. I think some of the issues are going to come in with the articulation and sort of the way the rubber moves, but in some ways it's a big advantage. In other ways it's a little tricky. But for now, let's take a look at how Vader looks with some other figures. All right, I'm not going to do a ton of comparisons because you'll quickly realize this does not scale with anything else, really. This thing is in its own scale. So I'll start off with a couple Darth Vaders. So here is a 1/12 scale SH Figure Arts Darth Vader. And then here is the movie realization Samurai Darth Vader. And you can see that he towers over both of those pretty well. And then for another comparison with Black Series, here is a regular 6-inch Black Series Tarkin right there, and tiny Tarkin next to Big Vader. And then finally, so you can see that this is actually a lot smaller than a Hot Toys. Here is a Hot Toys First Order Stormtrooper next to Darth Vader. So you can get a sense Vader is not going to fit in with any of your other Star Wars figures. So if, having your new figure in scale with all of your other figures, if you're not open to a new scale, this Vader is just, it's just not for you. But if you are, I think it's a pretty cool size. I like the shelf presence of that size. It's not going to dominate everything else like the Hot Toys. And it's also not going to cost you $250. Okay, so Darth Vader comes with a bunch of different hands for accessories, and starting off with the hands that are actually on him right now, those are the fists. He also comes with a pair of lightsaber gripping hands. And then he does come with a couple of gesturing hands. These are two essentially like pointing hands with slightly different, just like a slightly different positioning there. They look pretty good. And then he has, in addition to those, he does have this choking hand as well. So he's got two pointing fingers and then a choking hand on the right. And then finally he has two kind of like gesturing hands. This is like the join me hand where he kind of just reaches out his hand. And then this one is a hand that goes with another accessory. It's got a hole right there. And what you can do is you can plug this effect into his hand, and it looks like he's like absorbing a bolt, like he's absorbing Han Solo's blast at the dinner table or whatever. And I just want to show you swapping out the hands because it can be kind of tricky. I like to sort of bend the elbow a little bit and have the hand in this position before I start pulling. And then you can pop it off right there, And you can see it's literally the metal skeleton is there, and then this piece has a little bit of articulation, even though you don't get a ton of movement out of the wrist. Maybe a little bit. This does have a little bit of movement there, so you got to be careful when putting the next hand on, and just sort of try to get this thing straight. And you can use the back of the elbow to kind of brace it as you put the next hand on, and you got to use a little bit of force, but it'll pop on there. And one of the kind of annoying things with this figure is that when you reposition it, like when you put the hand on, it's going to snap back because it's kind of all gripping to the rubber body. And when you try to twist the hand, it will snap back because it's catching on that rubber. So in some ways, it can be a little bit easier to pop the hand off and then pop it back on in a twisted position, in like a different position. But it can be hard to pop the hand on, so that's a little bit of a pain in the butt when it comes to posing Darth Vader. He's also got this lightsaber that's painted well. Again, I can't speak to how exactly accurate it is to the movie, but it looks like Vader's lightsaber to me. And it's got a little hook, and that hook will go right onto his belt right over here. And the lightsaber blade is just a clear plastic piece. It does have an angle, so you want to make sure you put it in at the appropriate angle and get it in there. And it's nice and clear, nice and thick. It looks pretty good. I like the way this lightsaber looks. And finally, he comes with this stand that kind of represents the platforms and such on Bespin, like when he's doing like the carbon freezing chamber and trying to get Luke to fall into the chamber. And it's got all these little holes on it because it comes with some pegs on the bottom that you can pull off and then put on the top, and then you can peg Vader's foot into the peg holes right there. So, and it holds him up pretty well, does a pretty good job. And then it also has what looks like a connector piece. So when you get the next figure, when you get like Luke, you can put the connector piece there and then put Luke's base right connected next to Vader's, and then start lining up your figures. I mean, it'll ultimately make a big circle, but maybe you can flip them back and forth. But yeah, so pretty cool little stand that it comes with. It's a nice addition. Doesn't have any sort of like Hot Toys-esque crotch stand, which would have been nice, or maybe some sort of flight stand. But it's a nice touch. Mine doesn't quite sit flat. It's a little bit wobbly, so that's a little bit annoying. But maybe over time with Vader standing on it, it will sort of flatten out a little bit. Okay, so for the articulation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop the head off, and that's going to give me a chance to show you what the neck structure looks like, because there's some things you can do by popping the head off that I get nervous doing with the head on there in terms of articulating the head. And that will also give me a chance to show you like the under tunic a little bit and remove the cape so that it'll make it easier to demonstrate the articulation. So the head just pops off pretty easily. There's just a ball joint at the top that just pegs in, and it pops off a lot more easily than the hands do, which is really nice. And so, yeah, so the cape is just sort of nested around the rubber body neck here, and it just slides right up, and the cape comes right off. It's not pegged in anywhere or pinned in or glued on or anything like that. And then this piece is glued on, like this armor piece over the top, the shoulder armor piece is somehow glued on in the front, but the tunic and skirt piece underneath is one piece that is separate, and I believe if I wanted to, I could pull that right off. So that's kind of on there like this, and that's nice because you can reposition it. I like to put a little slack in the back here, just like this, to get it a little more centered so that the pieces right here stay a little closer to the middle, because they can kind of drift out to the side. But that's really cool. Like, it's just like a fully clothed figure in that way, which is very nice. So this piece here is on a joint. And most of what you see when I'm just messing around with the head is this thing moving around with the head on it. But the neck actually is on that metal skeleton, and it will angle down really far, and it will angle back quite a bit as well. So if you want to angle it down and then pop the head back on, you can have him looking down a lot more. But I just get a little bit nervous kind of repositioning that head with the mask on because, I don't know, it just feels like a lot of pressure to put on this plastic helmet and that I might kind of like mess it up a little bit. So I like to kind of pop it off and then get things in the position I want, nice and centered, and then pop it right back on there. And then, of course, once you get the cape back on, any sort of gappage sort of disappears, and it looks a lot better. But I'm going to leave the cape off while I do the articulation. So the arms can swing up quite a bit. Again, on that metal skeleton, everything is a very tight, takes a lot of pressure to sort of move things around. And I feel like they do have some butterfly action. So his arm can butterfly back like this and then forward like this. So you can get his arm across if you want to do the two-handed lightsaber hold. It does work. But one of the main issues, in my opinion, with using the rubber body is you can kind of get him into a position, and then because it's rubber, it's going to want to push back against it. So the arm is going to kind of push back out because of the rubber. So the full range of motion that he's capable of is not necessarily true because the rubber wants to bounce it back. It can happen with the hands when the hands are twisted and then they sort of twist back on their own. But those can twist around and you can pop them off and move them around wherever you want. The elbows have a ton of range. As you bend the elbow up, he can pretty much, it's like as if he has double jointed elbows. They go up really far. So that's pretty impressive right there. And I never really feel like this is stressed too much. Like I kind of was like, I wonder if it'll feel like it's going to push through or cut through or anything. But even when I get that elbow all the way up there, the pressure doesn't feel like there's a lot or anything. It doesn't feel tight. And once your elbow is bent, he can sort of rotate. I don't know where that point is, if it's at the top of the elbow or if it's up at the bicep, but it's effectively the same as a bicep swivel would work. And then again, with the rubber sort of making things bounce back, he has a decent amount of crunch, but the rubber is going to always make him kind of bounce back. So it's a little tricky to get him to crunch. And I have a really hard time getting him into that like kneeling pose in front of the Emperor. But so he can basically kind of go back this far and then forward that far. But the extreme motion isn't there because it's going to bounce back because of the rubber. He can twist. And again, the rubber's going to spring him back. The legs can kick up pretty far, but not quite far enough for me to be able to get him into that kneeling pose. And the knees, they bend past 90 degrees, but they snap back to that 90 degrees. So, it would take a lot of finagling to get him into that kneeling position, but that's not too bad. And then he does have, above the knee, he can rotate as well. So it's effectively what you would get if you had a thigh swivel. And you can bring him out into the splits pretty far. I just would be a little careful. I don't want that like crotch to get too stressed out there. I wouldn't want that to rip, but pretty good splits on Vader. And then down in the feet, you can angle the feet a little bit. But again, these are part of a foot that's in a boot. So that's about the angle that you can get it to before I feel like it stops. So he can do some fairly wide stances there. And he can point his foot down this far, and then he can point it back up a little bit. This thing's getting in the way. So Vader's got a pretty impressive, actually, amount of articulation. It just gets limited a little bit by the way the rubber reacts to it and springs back in certain positions at certain joints that have a lot of rubber there. I think this figure's pretty awesome. I'm very impressed with it. For $80, I think it's worth my money. I think I highly recommend this figure. I think people who are scale junkies and who want everything to be in the same scale and can't just have like this figure that's this like display piece on their shelf and needs everything to interact with all their other toys, they're not going to want this. And I don't recommend it for those kinds of collectors. But, if you are looking for a new Star Wars line that is maybe going to be a little bit slower pace, maybe not as deep, but still a lot of high-end quality and, some really interesting new techniques in action figure design, then this is probably something you might enjoy. It's got that heft. It really feels like a premium solid figure. It's got a metal skeleton. Who knows how long this stuff is going to last? Unless it reacts with air or sunlight or something, I don't really feel like it's fragile or flimsy or anything like that. So I don't really see it like getting damaged per se, but who knows what's going to happen over time. Like rubber tends to degrade and so on. But yeah, highly recommend this figure. This is a really cool release. And be sure to check out my other videos. I should have a video of the Mezco Batman PX Sovereign Knight coming up. I'm going to be doing a review of that 1/6 scale Skeletor. Lots of good things going on in the DorkLair. Check out the DorkLair podcast. Check out the DorkLair Instagram at the DorkLair. And until next time, may the Force be with you.